everyone. Welcome back to the Neuron Podcast. My name is Cindy Hovington, and I am your host. Today, I'm joined by two very special guests that I had the pleasure of meeting and speaking with a couple times. Shalaka and Allison, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
I love this. So we've connected through McGill University, and first, before we actually have this conversation, I'd like to thank the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute at the Neuro for supporting the Neuron Podcast. But today we're going to have a talk that I haven't really had enough. We need to talk about two things together. What's happening during pregnancy, and what we need to learn from that period, as well as we're going to talk a little bit about attachment. So it's a bit of a mix, but I think that this is perfect because we really don't talk about that period enough. I do it as well, where we talk about childhood and how important childhood is, but we don't go before that, and we need to take a couple steps back today. So I'd love to introduce you both and for both of you to also give us more information. But Shalaka is completing or finishing off your PhD. Is that
I just submitted my
way.
dissertation on Thursday.
Nice? Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
huge.
Thank
So
you.
yes, she's at the end in child psychology. And what is it you were saying that you study attachment? What is it specifically that you study?
Yeah, so my dissertation specifically revolves around predicting attachment. And we're looking at biological predictors such as genetic makeup of the child, how that interacts with exposure to prenatal stress in utero. So when the mother is pregnant with the child, and then also postnatal time point, meaning after the child is born, the parenting, and how all these three factors come together to influence the development of attachment when the kids are about. We're studying 36 months, but we're hoping to continue studying other time points too.
I love that. It's such important research, and I know that parents have a lot of questions, and I know there's a lot of misconceptions that we're gonna talk about very soon.
Oh, yeah.
Allison is a doctor specializing in internal medicine. Allison, may you talk a little bit more about what you do and what you specialize in?
Yeah, so internal medicine is not well known, and it's very different depending on where you practice it. So here in Quebec, I work in a smaller center. So I do a lot of it's like the equivalent of being a pediatrician, but for adults.
Mm.
So it's like a general. I do a lot of cardiology and nephrology and all of your internal organs. And I have a particular interest in obstetrical medicine, which is taking care of pregnant women when they get sick.
Got it. So specifically when they get sick, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So I don't take care of them
If
when
they're well.
their pregnancy's fine. I don't catch the baby. That is not my job. So they have their healthcare provider, which can be a family doctor, an obstetrician, or a midwife that follows their pregnancy. And if they get diabetes or hypertension during their pregnancy, then that's when I'll see them. Or if they have a pre-existing condition like arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease, and that needs a particular follow-up during the pregnancy, then that's when I come in.
Got it. Super. Like I love the work that you guys are doing. So you are the two new hosts of a podcast called Growing Facts Podcast.
Mhm.
How did that come about? How did the idea of this podcast, through conversation, through, what, through a need in society? Why did you decide to start this podcast?
So actually it was Shalaka's idea. So Shalaka has been doing her thesis, and during the course of her studies, she will talk to some of her friends about things that she finds interesting. And a lot of the friends, so Shalaka and I have known each other since CEGEP, so we have a
Yeah,
similar group of friends.
maybe we should clarify that we've known
Start
each
off.
other since actually, in theory, since we were small children. We did like
Yeah.
1 year of elementary school together,
No way.
lost touch, reconnected when we were like 17 or 18.
Wow.
So we do have a lot of friends in common, but I think it was this perception, this realization, how much knowledge that had become for me par for the course in studying my thesis was not exactly common knowledge, and I thought that was a pity because the people who should know it the most are the ones who don't know it, and the people who will stress the most. And so I remember thinking, okay, how, we're always talking about knowledge translation and research. Like, how do we get this to the lay public? How do we make it interesting? So in science, as scientists, we're always talking about knowledge translation. And sometimes the things that we do just end up in a scientific publication somewhere and they don't actually reach the people that they need to reach. And I'm very acutely aware of that because I'm also a clinical psychologist. So I do both research and clinical. And I feel like my job is constantly having to translate scientific evidence to people, but also my clients are children and families. I don't actually see pregnant mothers. I'm not like Allison who sees them all the time. And so I was like, okay, how do we do this? And then I was talking to Allison about this on the phone. And I don't know if you want to pick up this part of the story since that's you.
No, go ahead. You're doing
Well,
good.
okay. Well, she had already thought about doing something similar in terms of knowledge education, but for professionals in her field. That was the original intention. And that she was going to do maybe something similar to a podcast. And I had initially thought, oh, podcast would be a great idea. I'd love a co host. I was really hesitant to tap Allison on the shoulder and be like, do you want to be my co host? Because I knew she was really busy and she had to do this other thing. But then as time went on and I thought about it and I mulled it over and then she told me, "Oh, finally that other project just dropped. I'm not going to do that anymore, so I'm going to have a bit more time." So then I was like, "Would you maybe want to come do this with me?" And at the same time, or almost right around the same time, we found out, well, she found out that she was pregnant with twins. And then I thought, okay, well, this has got to happen
Perfect. Yeah.
because part of the premise of the Growing Fast podcast is that I'm doing IVF. So I'm like not even, well, I don't know. I could be, I'm not sure actually if I'm pregnant. I could be. But when I started the podcast, I definitely wasn't. And I wanted to talk to someone about that. And Allison was like ready baked with the twins available for us to, co-host. So that's how it happened.
It's such an important discussion to have with everybody. And I do agree with you that we need to have more of those discussions. And it's so nice to see people in science and medicine coming to share their experience and interviewing people. I've had the opportunity to scan through and listen to some of your podcast episodes, and it's so important and interesting. I'm sure that somebody was expecting, like, we don't hear, these are not the conversations that we hear. Um, what are some things that you think, because I was having this discussion the other day and I actually put a post out on Instagram this week about like prenatal classes and how they didn't really prepare me and help me understand. And the time that I had with my OBGYN, he was fantastic, but there wasn't any time. So it was a lot of myself doing research. Allison, there was something that you said in one of your podcast episodes where somebody said, "Oh, you're carrying low, it's a boy." It was something like that, I think, which I was told. I had 3 pregnancies, and every single time my in-laws are Italian, and every single person in that family would analyze my body and look and say, "This because of that, it's a boy. No, it's here, it's a girl." I mean, I would be assessed every pregnancy, like every couple months, like they would try to figure it out. And what are some myths out there, I guess, that like are still going on that you want to tackle on your podcast and say like, "Hey, that's not true." And let's start with let's start with this. Is it true? Can we figure out the gender or the you know?
No,
Thank you, Allison.
no,
But
absolutely not.
oh,
And it's so funny because now with the Harmony test, like you can do a DNA test really early on in the pregnancy, like
oh, yeah.
around 11 or 12 weeks to
Yeah.
know the sex of the baby. So sometimes you're walking around and you're 25 weeks along and you've known for like 3 months that you're having a girl. And there's this random lady that you meet at the pharmacy who's like, "Oh, for sure you have a boy." And you're like, "What?
No.
Where? What?"
So there's no evidence about this? Nothing at
No,
all? Let's
nothing
put
at
it
all.
to rest. Everybody that is listening to
Yeah.
this podcast, take this little clip, I don't know, share it with your friends and family and the grandparents and the Italian aunts and uncles, please.
And
Yeah.
the other thing that we see a lot also that I did speak about is that so many people do assess my belly and be like, "Oh, it's so small. Oh, it's big." And everybody has like this opinion about the size of my belly, and it's like the only person that I really care about is if my OBGYN thinks that it's fine. And I have regular ultrasounds. I have
But everybody's an
ultrasounds every month.
OBGYN. When you're
Yes.
pregnant, everybody around you
Oh
has
my
that
God.
degree all of a sudden. Like they know.
So many
Yeah.
opinions.
It's hard. Even before we go into the science, I mean, that is very difficult when you are pregnant.
Mm.
Like I had a stranger in an elevator, like touch my belly and I was like, like just like
Oh,
I like was
no.
shocked and I was like, "Did you?" And you don't know what to say sometimes.
Did you
So
really do that?
yeah, right? Yeah. I was
Like,
like,
what?
but it's always the cute little lady though, and which made me
There's
hesitate.
always the adorable older lady that you feel
Yes.
really bad telling off.
Yes.
But I think someone's got to do it. I think someone has to bite the bullet and tell off the cute older
Right?
lady.
So I actually haven't had that. Like it
At
happened
least, yeah.
it happened once and the guy was a bit drunk. So I'm
What?
like,
Wait, hold on.
well, we were at a work function
Yeah.
with
okay.
my partner,
Okay.
and the guy had a bit of alcohol.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's worse.
I feel
than the
like
old
that's an
lady.
outlier. Yeah, I know.
But still, that's
But
not
like,
good.
but it's hasn't happened since. So I don't know. Maybe I have a resting bitch face or
No.
something that makes people
They're just
stay
like, we
away.
can't. Yeah, they
But
know it's twins. You can't. I don't know.
and there's the extension of that my friend who had twins last year was telling me is that once they're born, people will stop you on the streets. People will talk to you. People will stop you. And she has had little old ladies poking their fingers in her twins' mouths. Last year,
Oh gosh.
like we're still in the pandemic. The old lady was like, "Oh, does he have any teeth?"
Oh my
come
God.
on.
Like, oh my God, what?
Oh my gosh. My heart's
So,
pounding. I
my
can't handle this.
solution to this is that I will be carrying a fly swatter along with my stroller.
Yeah, I
That
wanna
is
see
my
this.
plan.
Yeah, I want to see this.
Originally, I was like gonna bring, like those big wooden spoons, and I was like, oh, well, that's a bit mean.
Is it
It's
the
a bit
electric
threatening.
fly swatter?
Fly swatter is a bit softer,
Electric?
but oh,
gosh.
that would be great. Like you
Yeah.
don't understand the first time. I'm putting electricity on now.
Yeah. But and it's important that we talk about this with pregnancy because this is what's happening. Like we're so uncomfortable already with the pregnancy and then with people around us. Okay, now I know people are listening and they're like, Cindy, get into the science. And I'm like, okay, so let's do this. What is it that, so I'm going to ask this question pretty openly, but I don't know what you'd like to focus on. But basically, what is the important part in pregnancy that we're not talking about enough, right? Like we talk about the environment once the child is born, but the environment is also in utero. That's part of their environment. I've heard so many things about like even drinking. Like this is something that I still have like discussions with people. They're like, "Oh, the research says, you can do this. The research says stress
Mhm.
isn't like which I feel like stress is one of them that we should be talking about. But what else is there in terms of topics that we can just touch on a little bit and then people would learn more from your podcast. But, what's important during pregnancy?
Hmm. So I'm gonna put on my psychologist hat at this point more than my researcher hat because
Mm.
I'm thinking from the perspective of someone who just wants to have answers about how to live their life. I think we should talk about general lifestyle in
Mm.
terms of like things that you eat, maybe things you're exercising, your sleep, all that stuff, your stress levels. Let's talk about the alcohol
Yeah.
thing because I think that that's part of lifestyle,
Mm.
and also the things that we do to make our lives better, like medication. Maybe that's a big one. I'm sure you would agree, Allison.
Mhm. We also have one about exercise. And the point that we're trying to make during the podcast is mainly that let's try and figure out what's really evidence-based, like what are the real things,
Mhm.
opposed to what we've just been saying for the last generations.
Yeah.
And
Because the other problem too is that the under researching of
Yeah.
pregnant people, right, is a huge. I mean, it's a problem in the sense that hasn't been done enough, but also in the sense that there are things that we can't, like the alcohol. Maybe let's dive into it.
Yeah,
Let's talk
sure.
about the alcohol.
Mm.
So the reason that alcohol is a complicated subject when it comes to pregnancy is that we cannot do randomized controlled trials for alcohol exposure. We're not going to be dosing pregnant women with like, okay, you drink 1 glass of wine per week. You drink 2 glasses of wine per week. You do it in the first trimester. You do it in the second trimester. The sort of control that you need to actually see what is a minimum safe amount of alcohol is just not possible in human women. They've done it in other animals. They've done it in monkeys, animals that are close to humans. So because that's the case, they say that the minimum, because of that, they say that there's no minimum safe level of alcohol. But that being said, that's also, we have women who have drunk at different points in their pregnancy and there's been no fetal alcohol syndrome. We have women that barely drank and they still experience fetal alcohol syndrome. And so this is one of those situations where, okay, the research suggests that there's more preponderance of problems when you're exposed more in the first trimester, in the earlier part of pregnancy. But also this idea that if you have a glass of wine once in a while in your second and third trimester, there's good chances that nothing is going to happen, but we can't guarantee that it
Yeah,
won't.
exactly. Yeah.
And
And
so
that's
it's
the important part.
complicated.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, in the end, what is scary about pregnancy and about the science, I think, is that we are asking people to make choices on the basis of conclusions that are still being reached or that are uncertain. And I think people, because we treat pregnancy as this sort of like you're an incubator and you have to make everything perfect and everything has to be great, everything has to be perfect so that your child is okay. And I think this is a way that we seem to approach parenting also, that you
Yeah.
have to be the perfect parent, otherwise you're going to mess up your child. It's complicated. And then we end up pigeonholing ourselves into these like very narrow, I have to do it this way. And if I don't do it this way, everything is going to fall apart. Where actually there's a lot more uncertainty.
Yeah.
And it
And
becomes kind of cultish. Like people kind of develop that identity of being that type of parent. And if you don't have that mentality, then I will forever judge you and you're condemned to the seventh layer of hell.
But I think that's what becomes really hard, right? It's like I've seen with my work now with parents for a few years, I think there's always like there's so many topics: drinking during pregnancy, screen time in young kids, sleep training, sugar intake, like there's a few topics where it's either you're for it or you're against it, and nobody kind of says like there might be an in between, right? And I think that's what's hard, because those who say you can't judge the ones that do, and those who don't, like everybody's judging each other. So I think it's important that you do inform yourself and then you make your own decision, but your decision might not be my decision. And I feel like parents should just kind of like take care of their own things and worry about their stuff. And but when it comes to drinking, I wanted to bring it up there because I know people say like there's no research on it. I'm glad that you mentioned that, Shalaka. It's because we can't study it. We can't do the right study about that, obviously, and get to the results.
And we should mention that fetal alcohol syndrome is like an absolutely real thing. Like it's
Yeah.
not like they made up. This isn't one of those things and there are some things that seem absolutely made up, but this isn't one of those things that's absolutely made up. The problem is just we don't know.
Yeah.
So we know alcohol, like we know too much alcohol is bad. We just don't know what is the
How
safe,
little.
if there is a safe level and what it is.
Yeah.
But we know that moderate, like, I don't know, a lot of alcohol
But
is
it's
bad.
yeah.
You touched on one of your episodes, prenatal programming. Many have not heard of this term. We don't have to again get into all the details, but just give us a highlight of what you learned from that episode and what parents can learn more of if they listen to that episode on your podcast.
Do you want to go, Allison?
Nope. Go. So I'm throwing that one back at you.
So that's fair enough. That is what my research is about. So prenatal programming, there's a couple of different names for it. Some call it the developmental origins of health and disease. It's this idea that essentially the origins of your development, including your health and your functioning and all those things, don't start after you're born. They start while you're still being developed as a fetus. And that essentially what is happening to you when you're in the fetus, aka what is happening to your mother who is it's around you. That was a weird way of saying it.
Yeah, that was weird.
It was scary.
When you're in the fetus.
In and then out and then
know.
out. I
I don't
see. You
know.
like zoomed out of the fetus.
yeah, that's
I
it. I
get it.
started in the
That's
fetus.
what I
and then
visualized.
took the lens
I
back.
saw it. I get it.
So what is happening to you while you are being carried by your parent, right? So the idea is that the things that are happening in that moment might change some of the outcomes and might change some of the development, because in the old days we used to think that like, no, you're born with your set of genes, like your genes don't change, although we do have epigenetic changes and things like that. But we used to think that like, no, all the changes are going to happen after you're born. But now we're realizing, oh, wait a minute. So if you're exposed to more prenatal stress while you're developing, then there's more chance that you will develop this kind of temperament. For instance, this is a really well substantiated one, or more chance that you're going to develop depression or anxiety, or more chance that you're going to have XYZ health issue. And so that's the idea of programming. And it's not just like negative outcomes too, it's also positive outcomes, right? It's just the idea that our development after we're born is influenced by what we are exposed to while we are still a fetus.
Before, we thought that pregnancy was like this black box and that the fetus was cut off from the environment. But now we know that the environment really has an impact on the fetus, which is something that can be scary, but it's also something that's very positive. So we know that your fetus will recognize your voice. And that's so exciting. So you can interact with your baby while he's still in your belly. He'll react to light and to sound, and that's super exciting. But there's also the other dimension where even stress and other things can have an impact. And so that's the new thing that we're kind of developing into. So Shalaka spoke a lot about the psychological impact, but there's also health issues. So, for example, if the mother is malnourished, then there's a higher chance of obesity in the child because the human body is so fantastic. So they'll have understood, oh, there is this period of starvation, so I have to store more fat. And so there's a higher risk of obesity afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, let's not forget that this is an evolutionarily adaptive thing for the fetus to try to quote unquote predict what world is it going to be born in, and then try to make it in such a way that it is the most suited for that world. And then the problems arise when the world outside is not the same as the world inside. And that's when we have more complications.
I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone listening, and I know that I've had a conversation with Dr. Susan King from McGill as well a few years ago now. And I know that the listeners just kind of hesitated with that conversation because they felt we spoke about the ice storm here in Montreal and stress during, pregnancy. And those who have or were experiencing stress during their pregnancy for, X, Y, Z reasons felt like they were already setting up their child for failure and they were worried. And then there were moms also who said, like, I just gave birth and I had a really difficult pregnancy with lots of stress. And, I'm a single mom and now, like, I'm worried that I've damaged, these are the words that they were using. I remember with Dr. King, she spoke about, like, you can do a lot in the environment after. You spoke a little bit about, you spoke about your research and attachment. What are we seeing after? So let's say somebody did experience a very difficult pregnancy, lots of stress for whatever reasons. What can we do once the child is born?
But even before we get to that, the fact that you're experiencing stress during your pregnancy, it's not a one-to-one relationship that your child will be maimed or completely disrupted.
Damaged, I think was the word, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Because they're afraid. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not an obligatory thing. It won't definitely go to that. So the studies that have demonstrated that are populational studies. So there is a slightly increased risk. So yes, so there are things you can do afterwards, right, Shalaka?
Absolutely. I mean, this is where all the environment that happens after birth. So there's some really fascinating studies that show that actually when you're exposed to things like prenatal stress, um, when you're a fetus, might actually make you more responsive to positive intervention after you're born than someone who wasn't exposed to prenatal stress. So this is a hypothesis that's being tested, but I would say we're probably moving past the hypothesis stage and into refining this. And I think that's for me, it's like oh wow, that's awesome, because basically what we're saying is that it's not a unilateral negative outcome. It's that it just maybe programs you to be more sensitive to your environment. But if your environment is thriving, like if it's nurturing, if it's positive, if you've got a lot of stimulation, if you've got a lot of love, if you've got great attachment. So there's a study that shows, there's a few studies that show that secure attachment after exposure to prenatal stress will actually result in better developmental outcomes afterwards, right? And so the fact that you as a parent can be such a powerful moderator of that outcome, that you can change a lot of things. And I think sometimes people underestimate, maybe they're so bogged down in the fog of parenting and how complicated it is and how many choices you have to make. And you're like, oh my God, I don't know if any of these choices are good.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming. Yeah. And I think that people, they can't see the forest for the trees. And what the forest is that if you are a parent who loves your kid, who's doing your best to provide an environment, like, yeah, there's going to be a million ways to parent for sure. But if you're a parent who's doing your best to be responsive to your kids' needs and to provide an environment and to have them know that they are loved, that's probably the single most powerful thing that any parent can do. And never underestimate the impact of having that kind of attitude towards your kids on mitigating and possibly making your kids excel and do better than the kids who weren't exposed to prenatal stress.
I love that you said that part, because now I know, some parents that worry about, is this the right toy, the right chair, the right crib, the right whatever it is. and we worry, like I did it too as a first time parent, like every little thing, will this help or not? You're like, what am I doing? Am I damaging my child? Am I doing something wrong? But it's the bigger picture, and it's really the nurturing part and taking care of them and loving them is almost soothing if something did happen to you before, right? During the pregnancy. Not soothing, but like it heals or it helps
Reassuring.
take care. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The word attachment, we need to focus on that word a little bit because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around what that is. And that, I hear it come up when somebody has a newborn. I've seen this on social media where a mom was judged and there were like pretty nasty comments because she was cooking and the baby was in a little chair beside her rather than being in a baby carrier on her. And somebody said, don't you care about your child's attachment? And don't you want a strong attachment? But I don't believe that having your child in a baby carrier is what the attachment is. But let's talk about what that is because it's brought up very often in the first year of a child where, are you holding your baby enough? And if you don't, you won't have a strong attachment. Are you putting them in daycare? You're not going to have a strong attachment if they cry when you leave. Like these are the things that I've heard, which is why I'm saying those specific examples. And like sleep training, if you sleep train, you're ruining the attachment with your child. What can we tackle in
Oh,
all of
Lord.
those things that I've heard?
Oh, Cindy, where to begin? So I want to first highlight that I think some of the confusion also comes about from that term attachment parenting. I don't know who came
Oh
up
yeah.
with this term,
Mm.
but I just want to say that attachment is a description of a relationship and not a state that you are hoping to attain. Attachment is a description of a relationship between two people, and it is specific to the child and the caregiver in question. So that's the first myth that I wanted to dispel. Like, you're not trying to gain attachment. No, everyone has attachment. People just have different types of attachment, first of all. Second of all, I would love to have the confidence of all these parents who know exactly what is going to create secure attachment because I wouldn't have written my thesis about it if it was so damn sure. But everyone out there is like, has
They
got
know.
so many ideas. They know. And I'm like, wow, please let me in on the secret
Yeah.
because I would love to be so certain. And so the reality of the matter is that I think one of the things that people forget when it comes actually first let me dial back and let me describe what attachment is. Attachment is the relationship between the child and the caregiver. And this is true also when you're an adult. Like, attachment doesn't go away after you're a child. You still have attachment to your caregiver when you're an adult. And it is essentially a mechanism for the child to regulate their stress using the parent. So when they're really newborns, when they're like a couple of months old, their stress comes from the fact that they're hungry. They're hungry and they cry and it's uncomfortable, or they poop and it's uncomfortable and they cry. And what they learn over time is that when I'm uncomfortable and I cry, my parent will come and make that go, that this blob, this amorphous blob that is
Yeah.
my parent, will come and will make that go away and I will feel better. And then as they grow older and as their brains mature, then they'll start associating that person with feeling better, and the sources of distress are going to evolve. It's not just going to be I'm hungry, it's also going to be, oh, I'm scared, I'm alone in a dark room and I know that, okay, if I cry my parents going to come and help me. What is missed from this conversation is the fact that there's also things like biology and personality that play into attachment. So it's not just what the parent does. There you can have one kid with the exact same parents. Sorry, you can have two different kids, same parent, and the same parent does the same thing with both kids. But one of the kids is really, really sensitive and really needs a lot of reassurance and is really anxious and is really clingy with their parent. And the other kid will just be like, fine no matter what. And the parent can do the exact same thing with both. And they can have a really secure attachment with the one kid who's fine because he's going to be fine no matter what. And with the other kid who's really anxious, you could still end up developing an anxious attachment. And it won't be the fault of the parent because there's no such thing as, there's no fault in this situation, right? It's just a description of that relationship, of the interaction between the way that a parent is responding to the child's needs and the way that the child is perceiving the needs also, because children start developing their own interpretations of their caregivers. So I think it's important for people to understand that sometimes you can do all the things that you try to do and all the things that you want, and you might not have what is a secure attachment, but also, is that necessarily the end of the world? Like, does that mean that your child is going to be messed up forever? No.
And I love that you're saying that because, see, I think again, I have the pleasure of speaking with so many parents. So I hear the language and I find like we're using that to label kids and label whether a parent has performed well so far. Like even I think back to after having my own first child, my grandmother would say things like, stop holding her when she cries. Like if you don't respond to her every time, she'll become independent. My daughter was 2 weeks old.
Oh.
But she would say, and this is not uncommon. I've
Mhm.
heard this said many times from people who, their grandparents, their own parents, that you need to let them become independent. So let them cry. But then on the other end, when I'm speaking to parents, they say like, there's people judging if you go to them too much. Then there's people judging if you don't attend to them too much. Or then there's guilt in the parent. Like, do I go pee or do I like attend to my crying baby because I don't want to damage their attachment? Like, so I think that we're just using this so much to label everything that's happening
Absolutely.
in the
Yeah.
child's life. So and then now also the what I've been hearing a lot about is like associating that and the relationship we had with our parent and saying like, well, this is why my relationship sucks, or this is why I have an anxious attachment. It's like my mother's fault or my father's fault. So I love that you brought that all in, because I know lots of parents are kind of having this aha moment of like, okay, like it's bigger than we realize and we don't have all the answers to it.
No. No, I
Yeah.
mean, especially like if part of it is our genes, like what are you going to do about that, right? It
Mm.
is what it is. And the other thing too that I think is really important to highlight that people, I think, unless you've studied it, maybe you don't realize that that's the case, is the fact that the fundamental tension between your child soothing themselves and you soothing your child, like that tension is a line that you have to walk constantly as as your child grows. But the point of that tension is that when they are able to self-soothe, then they are capable of going out and exploring in the world. If they never learn to self-soothe, if they never learn to regulate themselves, then how are they going to go and learn and go in the playground and play with other kids and go to school and like have these challenges in life that are important for maturing? So the tension as a parent lies in trying to figure out when is the time to go in and help them soothe and when is the time to let them do their thing. And so you as a parent are always a secure base, but the fact that they experience emotional distress is not a bad thing.
Mm.
It's necessary for human development. And so then, and I know that's not helpful to parents because it's like, well, okay, well, how do I know? And I'm here to say I don't know. That's going
Yeah,
to
but
depend
it's
on you.
good. No, but that's research and that's a good thing, because I find that there's a lot of people out there making money because they know they have the answer to the question that you don't have an answer to. But the reality is that research does not have that answer. So we need to
Mm.
say that. Because I think parents listening right now are probably asking also like, so what's the blueprint? Like give me the recipe of like a secure attachment. But I'm assuming it doesn't exist yet.
I think what Shalaka has been saying is that there is no one size fits all.
Mm,
So when people are trying to sell you a book or saying like we have the miracle cure, it's not going to work for everybody. And
if
Highly
it's not said.
suspicious if anyone tells you
It
that they
is.
have the solution to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, in the 1800s when people had like this bottle of this elixir that like fixed everything.
The single bottle
What?
that
Yes.
fixed all
Yeah.
It will not work with
It
every kid. But
Yes.
and people are trying to be helpful and they're like, "Well, I did this with my kid and that really helped." And maybe it is helpful, but maybe it's not appropriate for your child. And it also has to be age appropriate or developmentally appropriate. So what your grandmother was telling you with a 2-week-old baby is definitely not appropriate, but would have been appropriate with a 5-year-old.
So what happens if like you have a 6-month-old or 6-week-old or a 2-month-old and you need a break and you're exhausted? I know that some parents, even parents in the United States that I've spoken with, it's like they're going off to daycare very early and they're wondering like, is that why we're seeing like a change in like behavior in kids? Like, are we again as a society, like, is this bad? And again, I know we might not have the answer, but I'm putting everything out there because I know these conversations are being had in society and some people say they have the answer. So whether you leave your 6-week-old with your parents, to go watch a movie or to go out to the restaurant, is that damage? Like, what do we know what's damaging in terms of that early environment, or it's really all question marks?
We don't
Do you
we
have?
don't have a specific answer, but I will say if we're going to tie it back to things like parental lifestyle and parental health, I will say that universally an overly stressed, anxious, sleep deprived,
Mm,
parent is generally not going to be a
yeah.
very effective parent.
And that's why we say to take care of the parent first. It's true. You do need that. Yeah. I wish more people would have told me that at the beginning. This was like 7 years ago, but you kind of fall into this rut of if it doesn't matter what I need, it's only what my child needs. And it's, if you're stuck in that sort of cycle, like you have to get out of it and realize it's not selfish to want to take a walk and to breathe a little bit. I'm happy you mentioned that. It's
Absolutely.
yeah.
And if we're bringing back to attachment, like let's not forget that again, a little bit of distress from your child is not going to scar them. Like it's not going to give them horrible nightmares or PTSD or something if you go to the movies and leave your parents leave your kid with your parents for, a few
In a safe
hours.
environment.
If it's yeah, as long as
Exactly.
I'm assuming we're talking about a safe environment here. We're not
Yes,
like
yeah.
putting their crib out on the street and being like, bye.
I'm just so glad you're saying all this, because I do know lots of parents have guilt around this and
Mm.
wondering again, and it all comes back to how much conversation there is around attachment, and that so many people have the answer to what damages and what doesn't. And I'm using that word damage because that's what they're saying. So what is it that parents or what do we have to, what's the take home message from this conversation around attachment? Like, what would you like parents to follow or to have on top of their mind when it comes to having these conversations with people around attachment?
I think the take home message here is that you know your child better than anyone else, and that you know the kind of personality that they have, and you know the kind of kid that they are, and you can do the things that feel right for your kid specifically while also making space for your own needs and your own mental health and stability, and the fact that you have to put your baby down sometimes is okay. And it's probably a super unsatisfactory takeaway, but that's
No,
going to be the
That's
takeaway.
that's what we
I think
have.
it's fine. Yeah.
That's all we have.
And I think right now, I think one of the hard things that we have in 2022 or 2023 is that society puts so much pressure on parents, a lot on moms, to be perfect. And oh my God, if you're going back to work too early, that's not good. But you have to feed your child. You have to put a roof over his head. So there's a limit to the choices that you can make, and you have to give yourself a break. And if you are just stressing out about everything, that's not good for you. That's might not be good for your baby either. So you want to make sure that you have an outlet, just to make sure that you have perspective.
Yeah.
And if your baby is 6 weeks old and he's got colic and he's colicky and you are freaking out and you can't take it anymore, the best thing you can do is forget the attachment. The best thing you can do is to remove yourself from that situation.
Yeah.
That's really good advice, because there's again guilt that it's selfish and you're not taking care of your baby, but in that moment you need to take care of yourself. As long as they're with somebody else and they're fine, you can step away from that moment.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, I mean, the fact that it tends to be women
Mm.
who either experience the guilt or have the guilt laden on them, I think is really significant too, because like, wow, that mom guilt seems to start from pregnancy onwards, right? Like it
Yeah.
seems relentless, and definitely not, men don't seem to, I'm sure they do experience it, but I think society doesn't seem to heap as much expectation that you will feel bad
Mm.
if you don't act like the perfect parent, quote unquote. Also, and I think it's important to talk about cultural expectations, because let's not forget that attachment is a mechanism between environment and biology. But in our culture, we're expecting parents to be, say, primary caregivers, et cetera. But in another cultural context, if the people taking care of the child are not necessarily the biological parents, then it's not something that is fundamental between it's not like the shared DNA of the child and the parent is what bonds them in attachment. No, it's the recurring interactions, and that could be with a grandparent, it can be with a caregiver, it can
Adoptive
be with
or
a nanny. Exactly. And so we're very, I think, entrenched in our cultural perspective that like, okay, the parents are the ones who must take care of the baby and meet all the needs, etc. But there are other cultures where it's different, and you don't see like all these children being super messed up from like, attachment problems, whatever. Like, no, they have the same rates of anything else that we do here.
On the contrary, you know how when we say it takes a village, like if you have a good social circle, it's going to be so much easier on you, and it's probably going to be better for your children too.
I was gonna say, when you were talking about culture, like I've spoken to some people that say in the old days and in some cultures as well, like there was a lot of that community, a lot of that when somebody's expecting a child, that they were taken care of. And once the baby came out, like they had like a whole group of people around them cooking and helping them and supporting them. We're missing that. That's not
Mm.
really present anymore. And especially now with the pandemic, so many parents had children and were completely alone in their journey as new parents. How do we, I've tried to explore this as well in terms of like creating a Zoom meeting for new parents, or, trying to have like, we call them weekly family meetings. But it's hard because we can't show up wherever we want either as a new parent. We might have a crying
Mhm.
baby. We know like people would go on and off of the Zoom call. How do we create, I've read some of Dr. Bruce Perry's work as well, where he talks about like community and connection and the importance of that. But I don't know if there's an answer to this. I'm just putting it out there because how do we create that community again? And have, from what you've read, is that community really important as well?
I
Yeah.
can't tell you anything about the research, but yeah, one of the things that we do know is that during the pandemic, women who were isolated found it really hard
Mm.
and had an increased rate of postpartum depression.
Mm.
So I think it's something that we're gonna have to make a conscious choice about and try and be I think maybe the government also has to make decisions. So here in Quebec, we're pretty lucky with our maternity leave, which I know in the States it
It's
really
about 6
sucks.
weeks.
Oh,
If
it's
you're
the
lucky, you
worst.
get 6 weeks. Yeah, I know. I
Yeah,
had put
and
out a survey, and most moms got 4 weeks, if they were lucky. 4
and
weeks.
that's terrible. Like your body has undergone so much change.
Mm.
Like how can you be on your feet and ready to go? And it's got to be so hard to leave your baby on the side. I know my mother was a business owner, so I know at 6 weeks she went back to work,
Mm.
and I know that was really hard for her. And people who don't have a lot of family close that can help, that's also super hard. So I think maybe hopefully in the next years some of the things will change. It's nice because now there's a few politicians who are women and who in their childbearing years and who bring the babies over to parliament. And so
Yeah.
hopefully there are some changes that'll improve things. Now breastfeeding in public is a bit easier. There are some policies that are improving. Social
Mhm.
media can help
Yeah,
sometimes
Can
it's
also be
true.
to
terrible, though.
connect,
Yeah.
but it can be the worst.
Yeah.
Because
But it
people
can
are
help.
so
Yeah.
judgy.
Yes.
So you really have to find your space for you.
Yeah.
Here where I live in Victoriaville, there's this really cute community organism, which is La Maison des Familles. So literally like the family house. I don't know if there are a lot
I have one here in
elsewhere.
Laval that I attended.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was it was in famille. There was La Maison Vimont, I think it was, and it was
Okay.
the same thing. Like once I had my kids, it's free. It's a community center, and you were able to go
Yeah.
there and just connect with other parents,
So they
which
have
was nice.
classes. They have people who are there to answer questions, to help out. There are people who are generally like very positive and empowering, and just for people who don't have many connections and who need to be told that everything is normal,
Mm.
that can really help. So those community services really help out.
Mhm.
Also, I was just remembering our interview with Dr. Herba, where she talked about the fact that all of the traditional milestone, like for instance, having a shower when someone's pregnant, like during COVID, because they did that study about um, pre and postpartum during COVID, and how so many of the rituals and the milestones that we hold around pregnancy, around birth, whatever, that maybe have fallen by the wayside, and maybe they seem a little silly. Like I know I tend to be more cynical and I tend to roll my eyes at a lot of traditions. And I'm like, oh, we don't need that. I'm the kind of like really cynical person who doesn't celebrate Valentine's Day with my husband because I'm like, we don't need a day to show our love.
I
But
I say
But-
that leading up
Yeah.
to it, and on the day of, I expect something. I'm
You're like,
really
where's my
bad.
chocolate?
Yeah. I'm like, no chocolate.
I
What?
want my flowers. But I think that when it comes to things like pregnancy and birth and post-birth, I think they serve a really important societal place because they mark milestones, they gather people together, you get to see the person, you get to see the baby, you get to check in. I think it's an opportunity for you to check in with that person when before you might have just been texting them or maybe having a phone call with them. Now you see them face to face and you're like, oh, you're struggling. Let me help you. Like like that idea. And Allison, we talk about this so much all the time, this idea that it's not just sometimes like, okay, maybe you can't breastfeed the person's child for them. But what you can do is you can liberate them in order to give them the time and space to do the things that they need to do. So you can cook some meals for them. You can bring over stuff. You can watch their other kids if they have other kids. Like that, the circle of support, the circle of care surrounding the person. I think that one of the ways that we can engender more of this well-being in parents is to ask yourself, how do I fit into other people's circles? Because I think we are very directed inward often. And I think the person who is a new parent is not the person who should be sitting and trying to figure out, oh my God, how do I build community? Like, no, you're just trying to keep this young thing alive. Do you have time to sit and like call organisms and whatever? No, you don't. You're just trying to not like drop your baby on the kitchen floor. So not that I'm projecting ahead or anything, but 100% I'm going to be afraid of dropping my baby once I have one. But so I think that like, if we as friends, as partners, as family, as like, heck, maybe you went to a yoga class with someone and you connected with that person and now they're pregnant and you're like, how could I help them? You can always look up, yoga classes that they could do after they've had the baby. Like there's so many things that can be done where we can structure and support and help the people who are in the center of it all, in the eye of the storm. And that could be a way of making the communities more easily accessible to them,
One of the things also is that I think we're not so much used to babies anymore. Like
what do you mean?
Well, we don't have those big families. So like
I see yes, it's true.
So
Yeah.
like I have friends that have kids, but like before living my own pregnancy, I wasn't really sure how to help them, how to be a support. And we're just not really used to it. And we're also, society is kind of trying to normalize pregnancy in a way that like pregnancy is a normal part of life and you should just go through it and not ask for any accommodations, or basically just suck it up and go and do your work and do everything and go be a super mom, and your productivity should not be decreased and you should do everything. And so it's kind of hard to know when to step in or what to do to help. So my pregnancy is going super well. So I don't need help, guys. It's fine. But for afterwards, like I'm going to have twins. I will need help for sure. So my plan to fully communicate this is that I am going out and I am buying a whiteboard and I will be writing the tasks of the day, things to do. So that'll help my partner to know what he has to do. And if we have visitors that day, well, they can go look and pick what they want to do.
Check one off. That's smart.
Yes.
That's so
and
good.
we were actually thinking of making a point system. So be like, if you take out the trash, that's 2 points. If you wash the dishes, that's 5 points. And when you make it to 10, then you get to hold the baby.
Putting a new meaning to the word incentivizing.
Yes. I'll let you know in a couple of months if we actually do it.
I absolutely enjoyed this conversation with you guys. Thank you for the work that you are doing and for the podcast. I think we need a follow up because I had a lot more questions, but we're approaching an hour now. Allison, good luck with the delivery and with the I want to touch base with you and see how it's going, but good luck with everything at the beginning. And Shalaka, good luck with you too. I hope everything goes well and that it's nice to I'm so excited to continue listening to your journeys and on your podcast and learning more about like what's going on in your lives and how you have such different processes. And we all need to hear that. We need to just have these conversations, and you guys are having it. So thank you.
Thanks for having us. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you for having us.